Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today we have two men with us who both served in the military in different eras, but they have one thing in common. They both flew military aircraft. We have Lindy Palin of Derby and Bill Round of Newport Center. I'm going to let you guys tell a little bit about yourselves, what you flew and when.
You want me to start?
Yes.
Okay. I enlisted in the Army Air Force shortly after Pearl Harbor. My records were lost, so it was a long time before I actually was called to active duty. But I went through the aviation cadet program, became a pilot, and was assigned to multi-engine training. Learned to fly B-17s, and was then assigned to the 8th Air Force in England, where I flew 35 missions, and that's pretty much the story.
Right, and here you are back in the day. You haven't aged any.
Looks can be deceiving.
Okay, Bill.
Well, my sixth grade yearbook said I was going to be an Air Force pilot, and subsequently I applied for and was accepted at the Naval Academy.
Not in sixth grade, though.
Not in sixth grade, no. I happened to be the first class to graduate from North Country Union, and Senator George Aiken offered me an appointment to the Naval Academy. I made it through there and managed to get selected for naval aviation training. I spent a year and a half or so post-Vietnam training pipeline, and ended up receiving my wings in October of 1974. So I was post-Vietnam, and there was a lot of activity going on, but I received orders to a Navy A4 squadron. I flew A4s for about 20 months, and then I was selected to transition to the Navy A6. Right. And completed a career in carrier aviation, flying the A6.
You know, it's interesting in hearing your story about how in sixth grade you wanted to be a pilot. Well, Lindy's been on my show several times, and I've written about him, so I know he also, from a very young age, wanted to fly. But in your generation, flying was all new, and I know you were kind of, you know, Lindy and then Lindbergh. It seemed kind of fitting. Lindy actually went for his first airplane ride in back of where Derby Junior High is, at the airport that was there, and you were hooked on it ever since.
That's right.
Yeah.
Never really thought that I would have the opportunity to fly. I was fascinated by aviation as a kid. And actually never really thought that I'd have an opportunity to be a pilot, but the war sort of took care of that.
So why did you want to be a pilot then?
Well, my father was, like Lindy, what was then called the Army Air Corps, and before the Army smartened up and kicked the Air Force out, and it became its own entity. So my dad did the same thing, enlisted, and ended up in pilot training, and then really, this is tangential to the story, but he was in a group of about 2,000 pilots in Big Spring, Texas area. And then one day there were 10 names on the board to report to the flight commander. So they all trundled in and were told that they were being terminated for pilot training, but they were all being selected to go to bombardier navigator training. And then a few days later, they washed the rest of those pilots out and sent them all as infantrymen to the Battle of the Bulge. So he was quite lucky. But anyways, my like and knowledge of aviation came through his activities, and then I got to attend a whole bunch of air shows at the old Newport Airport when we used to have those big fly-ins and stuff, and then at the Naval Academy, of course.
Were you there? Now you're probably too young when it opened. They had the big fly-in where they had all the military aircraft.
I wasn't here then. We moved in the area in 1960.
Right. Okay. This was I want to think early 50s.
Yeah.
So all right, just for the viewers, just explain what a B-17 is. You know, the bomber, because there's a lot of people on that airplane.
Yes, well, B-17 was a 4-engine, conventional, prop-driven aircraft, not a jet. And initially had a crew of 10, and later they reduced the crew to 9, and the reason for that was we flew in tight formation, and originally they had 2 waist gunners, and they finally decided that the waist gunner who was on the side of the aircraft that was toward the inside of the formation was pretty useless. He was more apt to shoot down one of his friends than one of the enemy. So they did away with that position. So we were a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier. The top turret gunner was also the engineer of the aircraft, so-called, and ball turret gunner, tail gunner, radio operator, and waist gunner.
Right.
That was the crew.
And you were long range. Some of your missions took all day, right?
I think my longest mission was 8.5 hours.
Right. Was it 8.5 out or 4 out and 4 back?
No, it was 8.5 total.
Right.
We flew from England to Czechoslovakia that day.
Right.
Average missions were probably more like 4 or 5 hours. We traveled at the magnificent speed of 150 miles an hour.
Could you?
A little bit different than my friend here.
So explain. Now, what was your plane again?
My plane was the A6 Intruder.
Right. And could you get up to that kind of speed?
Well, if we didn't have that speed at the end of the carrier, you weren't going to fly. So at the end of about a 600-foot shot from the steam catapults, you had that speed and more, hopefully.
Right. So So an A6 Intruder, and that's not prop driven like his. How fast could you go?
We were what was described as LBA, limited by airframe, but we typically could, again, depending on your altitude, it was about 540 knots, as fast as you could go, and it didn't matter if you're straight up, straight down, or horizontal. The airplane was just designed in such a way that it was, again, limited by airframe to that speed, so it was subsonic.
Right. And you were in, even though you were in during very extended period of time, your service didn't include going into a war zone. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm what they might call the Cold War baby.
Right.
We fought the Cold War, and there was no overt action,
Right.
but there was plenty of covert action.
Right. Yeah. Well. Yeah. I've heard about the covert actions. Like even my own father talks about after the war, planes coming back in peacetime, but with holes in them, and so where did you fly? Where were you stationed most of the time?
I was what they would call an East Coast sailor. I spent the majority of my time flying A6s out of Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach.
Right.
That's when we were shore duty. When we went to sea as an East Coast sailor, we were primarily assigned to the Mediterranean area and the North Atlantic.
So what ship were you assigned to?
I flew off several carriers, primarily the Forstall. I've trapped on about the Vincent, the Nimitz, the Kennedy over the years.
Now, do you recall your first time taking off and landing from a ship? Because to me, as a non-pilot, a person who likes to fly, I would think, especially that landing the first time, you must be holding your breath.
You tend to squeeze the stick a little. It was daytime, obviously, and it was in a T-2 Buckeye, the basic jet trainer for the Navy, and it was aboard the USS Lexington, a wooden deck World War II era carrier that they converted to a training carrier.
So are you glad you didn't have to worry about those that type of set and landing on an aircraft carrier? But I suspect you could have done it with the right airplane.
I don't know that I really thought about it that much. I was just telling Bill that I had a very close buddy from high school days who became a career Navy pilot, and we used to chat a lot. A little competition, you know.
Were there any of these guys left training you when you started in the military, or had they retired?
They had all retired. We had, of course, a plethora of Vietnam era guys, and the A6 was the workhorse in Vietnam. Once they figured out you couldn't fly it in daytime because it was quite slow.
Right. You know, I don't know how many more pilots or how many more airmen there are from your generation. I know I've been interviewing Sam Bly, who a lot of people had no idea. He's 95 years old, and he's very quiet. And then, yeah, you were at the you were at our Pearl Harbor event at Bel Air, and he totally stunned even the workers when all of a sudden he piped up and talked about he was in a bomber, he was a gunner, and he was shot down over Austria, and he became a guest of the Germans in Stalag Luft 3, and then his son was telling me just in a little snippet that that either I wrote or that was on TV, he learned more about his father's service because his father never spoke about it. And now that he's in his final days, he's speaking all about it. And but there's not many of you folks around anymore.
No, not really.
Right. Bill, how do you feel about this generation of pilots? From a pilot's perspective?
Well, they were the greatest generation, and they took what was an emerging capability that powered flight and armed flight, both from bombing and from air to air. They started to perfecting that art, and it has become obviously the premier level of defense for the country. The forward deployed carriers and the forward deployed Air Force air wings.
Right. Lindy still goes up occasionally in some of these old aircrafts. Do you do that every year?
No, it's been a couple of years since I've done it, but I have flown a couple of times in an old Stearman biplane, which is what I learned to fly in, which is an open cockpit, bi-wing, cruises at about 90 miles an hour. But that's probably more fun to fly than anything else. And I've also been up in what was the advanced single engine trainer during World War II. And one of the most entertaining things I've done recently is a year ago, I was a guest of the Air National Guard because I was in the Air National Guard years ago. And they let me get in the trainer. And I found out real quickly that you don't use very much muscle on those things. It's almost like doing a computer game. We had a big wheel and a stick in front of us, and you had to use quite a bit of muscle to fly that thing. And so I got in this trainer, and this little joystick. It's it's about this high, and it fits your hand. And they asked me, where would you like to go today? I said, well, wherever. They said, how about Bagram Air Base? I said, oh, okay, that's fine. And so they put Bagram Air Base up on the screen, and they got me all set up, and I'm flying along, and I'm watching one of the few needles that I recognized was the flight indicator. And I could see that one wing is dipping a little bit, so I said, well, I got to make a correction. And when I made the correction, I went right into a roll.
I knew you were going to say that, yeah. So is that because your airplane, you actually had to work on a B-17? Did you actually
a B-17 required work, yes.
So what do you? So I've asked Bill what he thought about your generation, but having experienced that and still being a student of flight, what do you think about his generation and the generations that followed him?
Well, I'm kind of jealous in a way. I wish that I had had the experience of flying jets. I did see German jets at the end of my tour. Toward the end, they had just gotten that German, I think there were two different types that they had developed. So I did see two jets when I was in Europe. Not friendly.
Right.
But I've always been a little bit jealous of these guys, you know, that can go 500 miles an hour as opposed to 150 miles an hour.
So
and I watch them, you know, when they hit the end of the runway or the end of the carrier, whichever goes straight up. So I get a thrill out of watching that, and I think what they've done in, you know, advancing aviation is great.
You know, how fast can you? So did you ever fly out of Burlington?
Oh, yes.
So how fast can you get from Burlington to, say, Bangor, Maine?
40 minutes maybe at most. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of slow. The F-16s do it in minutes. You know, the guys
They
out of
get there
Burlington.
probably in 20 minutes.
Yeah, they just hit the burner and off they go.
Huh. Now, is it true? I once heard it said that. Well, do you fly by eyesight, going that fast, or by instrument?
A combination of both. When you're at low level, which the A6 was designed to do,
Yeah.
you're flying, you're keeping your eyes on the terrain, etc. At altitude, you fly on your instruments.
Right. Now, the reason I ask is some people said it's really, really easy if you're not paying attention to slam into the side of a mountain if you're.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. The A6, you did most of your work at altitude.
We were.
And we were designed to get in below the radar, et cetera, with the A6. So we actually had terrain following radar.
Right.
And so you could set a pipper on there to make sure that you cleared everything in front of you by a specific altitude. And if you drove that, even at night, you were quite safe.
Right. You know, I'm not sure if you heard, I don't know if you were in the military at the time, is there was a jet that crashed not too many years ago, maybe 10, 20 years ago in Kirby, Vermont. I can't tell you which the exact details, but yeah, it crashed. The people were able, the person was able to bail out. But if you go home and Google it, it's actually been in the Northland Journal. Somebody else wrote the article, and it was in the last 20 years. And
It was a military aircraft?
Yeah, it was a jet.
I don't recall.
I'm thinking it wasn't one of the Green Mountain Boys, but if you Google it, you can find out all about it. I know during the war, though, there was a Canadian airplane that crashed into the side of JP.
JP, yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So would you lead your, so 6th grade, you wanted to be a pilot. Did you make the right decision?
Oh, I think so. I have no regrets. How about you?
If I had it all to do over again, I certainly would follow the same career path.
Right.
We have a saying in the Navy anyways, and I get to do all this and they give me flight pay too.
So how long were you in for?
I was 4 years at the Naval Academy and then 24 years commissioned service.
Right. Now, I don't know if you went to, would have been in the academy, or the Naval Academy you were in. My cousin David Cook from Orleans, Barton area, I think he was in the Air Force Academy, and he was a pilot.
Yeah.
I would think during your general time period.
Name doesn't ring a bell.
Right.
Yeah.
But all right, we're also here to talk about an upcoming event in which you're going to be speaking at. They're having an event on June 8th at the East Side, 6 o'clock. It's a combination of honoring our veterans, which I know both of you are on the list. In which there's also going to be Republican gubernatorial candidates speaking. I think it's good because the people come from a whole spectrum. They come from the different wars. And Bill, you've been involved in this event, right?
That's correct. I happen to be a member of the Orleans County GOP committee, and we're sponsoring a function as a fundraiser, and the primary theme is, again, the recognition of our veterans, all wars, all seasons.
All political
All political affiliations,
Because it isn't about whether you have to be a Republican to be recognized, because the number one is.
No, it just happens to be the theme of the GOP effort, and we're relating it to our fundraising activities.
Right. Yeah, I know it's been interesting. You have some of the people being recognized have never ever been recognized before. And you know what one thing is the Vietnam generation, they certainly weren't, they certainly were not recognized the way they should. But a lot of World War II people tell me that if you were overseas at the end of the war, by the time you came home, it was like, okay, the world had already moved on, and we're putting that thing behind. So a lot of there's a belief that World War II veterans received all kinds of recognition after the war. But were you home at the war's end?
Well, I was back in the States in 45.
Right.
I got back in May of 45, fully expecting, of course, to be retrained at some point in B-29s and go on to the Pacific. But then the war ended quickly. But I would say that when I get out of the service, there was a lot of recognition. Yeah. We were really welcomed, honored. Maybe that wasn't the case after it was all over for a while, but It was certainly the case when I got out, because I was relieved from active duty in December of 45.
Right. I know one of the people being recognized is my former junior high teacher, who also taught at Derby Academy before it came to junior high, is Dick Hall, who, even though he isn't a native of this area, he spent all his summers here. His family were natives. They owned what is now the Derby Village Store. And I've known Dick many, many years, and I had no idea that he was even, not only is he a World War II veteran, but he also has a Purple Heart. He went all through Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. And I think it's nice to recognize some of these, folks, and then you, and then there's a Bell from Irisburg,
yes,
right, who organizes all these military salutes. And a lot of people don't realize that with your generation disappearing, because there was a massive numbers of you, that it's not always easy to come up with these people to do these military ceremonies now.
True.
So what more about the event?
Well, as you mentioned, it's a fundraiser, but we're also expecting both the Republican gubernatorial candidates, Bruce Listman as well as Phil Scott, and Randy Brock, the lieutenant governor, is going to be here. All of them, I think, are attending an event in Montpelier earlier in the day, and they're going to join us at 6 or 6:30, as you mentioned, on the 8th of June. And again, the state Republican Party has picked remembrance and honoring veterans as a primary theme this year. And so locally we picked up on it as well, and that's the genesis of our sponsorship.
Right. Seating's limited, though.
It is limited to, I think, 160, I think was the number that Chet mentioned.
Do you have any contact information about if somebody's interested?
Well, they can get a hold of me, or they can get a hold of Chet Greenwood.
Do you have the numbers?
I don't have Chet's right off the top of my head, but I can be reached at waround@myfairpoint.net, or I'm in the phone book, 334-2359. Feel free to call.
Right. Are you looking for? I know you've made a lot of appearances over the years because between you and Joe Queenan, your numbers are dwindling down. But are you looking forward to this?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I think it's a really nice gesture on the part of the Republican committee. I'm glad to participate.
Right. I know I was talking to Winston or Joe Carbonneau yesterday, and he was a hardcore platoon leader, 2 tours in Vietnam and Purple Heart, and he's very open with the issues he arrived home with. He was an old man, and they used to call him Grandpa because he was in his 30s in Vietnam. He was a career military guy, and he was, he's very open that he was not the same, and he's had a lot of issues, and he just loved this. Another one who jumped at the opportunity was when you think of combat, back in your day, you didn't have, even yours, you didn't have many women experience in combat. I had another young woman I had a young woman on my show from Barton, Nicole Conley. She was, I think, 3 tours in Iraq, and as she says, technically, I guess I weren't in combat, but boy, when they were shooting, it sure felt, because she was an MP, and when they were going door to door looking for insurgents, and she was another one, just because she talked about the struggles that she faces. She was very open. She came on the show, but she has a different struggle. There's not many other women who have experienced what she has experienced here. Whereas, if you guys want to talk to somebody, just talk about it. There's other guys around who've experienced combat. There's very few women who have experienced what she's gone through,
Sure.
at least in this area.
I had the opportunity to be in the military as they transitioned. The women began to pick up the military as a career. I believe the first women at the academies showed up in 1976, and then the first all-female flight class was also started while I was in the training. So it was that was the transition, I guess, to where we're at today.
Right. I think with today's wars, you also don't know where the lines are kind of blurred. Well, it's kind of like your predecessor, the Vietnam War. You didn't really know who was the enemy, but in yours, you pretty much knew who wanted to kill you.
Oh yeah, it's very clear cut. There was no doubt.
Right. Would you want to be a veteran, a serviceman in this day and age, though, compared to your generation?
Boy, that's a hard question. I'm not sure whether I would or not. I would certainly be willing to serve if there was a real need, absolutely. But I don't think there's quite the motivation now. We had extreme motivation to get in and do the job.
How do you feel about serving today?
As Lindy said, that's a difficult question. We have our backgrounds, which formulated our mindset. I'm not sure how I would survive or function in the military as it's shaped up today, but be certain that given the call, we'd both jump at the whistle for sure. That so many things have changed. Again, it'd be very difficult to say. Although I do live vicariously through the youngsters that are out there training and becoming both male and female, becoming today's naval aviators.
Now, how come neither one of you went into? Because a lot of you folks go into becoming commercial pilots, as my own cousin did. After the military.
I think there were a couple of things in my case. Probably number one was that my wife was not really thrilled about me flying. But the other factor was I was a bomber pilot.
Right.
There were all kinds of guys standing or waiting to get into commercial aviation who had, for example, flown over the hump. They had logged many, many more hours than I had, and they were really doing the same thing that they'd be doing when they went into commercial aviation. So I never really looked at it seriously. I didn't think my chances would be very good anyway, because of my particular type of flying. And like I said, the home front wasn't thrilled with me flying anyway.
What about you?
Well, in my case, kind of parallels Lindy's experience. I was hired by American Airlines in 1980, but as in the case of the World War II pilots, there was a plethora of pilots out. The economy went kind of a little sour, so there were, I think, 668 folks that were furloughed from just American Airlines at the time. And I did get a postcard to go back in I believe, 1984. But by that time, I'd already been surprisingly promoted again and was en route for another potential promotion. And so the economics were that it was just made a whole lot more sense to stay and complete my career.
I know one veteran, he went on, he flew, I'm not even sure if he flew in the military, but I believe his name was Ray Cloutier from Barton. He said that he flew until he was almost 80 because overseas he flew for airlines because they don't have the strict requirements, and he's passed away now. But he said the one time he received more fire than as a civilian pilot than he ever did when he was in the military, because he was one of these people who were flying people in and out of Vietnam on these non-military transports.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, he flew a long time. I swear he flew right until he passed away. Hopefully you weren't in the seat, but no, I guess I'm not sure. What is it? It's relatively young here.
60 was the rule for years that you had to retire from active piloting commercial airlines. They've just recently, I believe they moved it to 65, but most of my contemporaries were done at 60.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go back just as we wrap up. The event is at the East Side on June 8th.
June 8th at 6 to 6:30.
Right.
There's heavy hors d'oeuvres, and again, the guest speakers will be there. But the primary focus is our veterans that we're recognizing.
Right.
And we've invited 10 or 11. I think
Right.
Chet Carpenter makes the 11th if he can make it, and we do hope he can. So they'll be the focus of the gathering on the 8th of June.
Right. Yeah, you were saying Chet was actually 1 year ahead of you, Chet Carpenter.
Yes, in Derby Academy, right.
Yeah, Chet, Chet's health is beginning to fail, but Chet is one of, the man has a mind like a computer, and it's just amazing what he remembers. He had the unfortunate episode over in the Pacific of when everybody's watching out for their enemy. Well, the Coolidge with a whole bunch of local boys on it stumbled into nobody told them the bay that they were pulling into was mined by the Americans, and they lost the ship out from underneath them. But he did say that probably saved him some really tough days at Guadalcanal, because they probably would have been right there, because he said they were never told where they were headed to, but they ended up at Guadalcanal several months later after they could get a boat to pick them up. So, okay, final words, Lindy.
Regarding the
anything.
Well, I just want to say that I'm pleased to be invited to the event. Glad to participate, and I think it's really great that the Republican Committee is sponsoring it.
and again, we're more than pleased to sponsor a function like this, and we're proud of the fact that all those folks actually stepped up to the plate and helped out with our national security. And so we're looking forward to seeing these folks and getting their story out.
You know, it's interesting. I sit here very often interviewing veterans, but I haven't served a day, but I figure at least I'm giving you folks a voice. And I want to thank you for your service, because it has been interesting throughout the years. I've even interviewed an ardent German soldier with Lindy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they've actually been in school together.
Nice.
They've gone and they teamed up, and every once in a while I could see the hair stand up on back of Lindy's neck, and he had to verbally give him a tap up back of the head. And he's still alive. He's still kicking.
Yes.
Yeah, wars make strange bedfellows, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's always great when we can get veterans from different eras to talk about their service.
Well, a final plug, this is the 70th anniversary of the Blue Angels.
Oh, is it?
So if anyone gets a chance to see the Blue Angels, they've got 64 shows planned this year. Jump on the wagon. You'll enjoy every minute of it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.